Hi, everybody. This is Captain Gudger, and I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to today's webinar. In this webinar, we're going to talk about how to turn your interviewers into your biggest allies. I want you to pay close attention, turn off your cell phones, because when this webinar is complete, you will know exactly how to transform your interviewers from gatekeepers who are standing between you and your dream job. You're going to learn how to transform them from gatekeepers into your biggest fans, and more importantly, your biggest allies during the screening process. Now, during this webinar, we will cover 3 secrets to turning your interviewers into your biggest allies. Secret number 1 is all about the passion. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a few moments. Secret number 2 is all about the points. And secret number 3 is all about the preparation. Now, before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself and my background. My name is Joel Gudger. I'm a captain on Boeing 757 aircraft for United Airlines. I've been a captain for about 24 years now. I've been a captain on 757s for about 18 years. And I just got my 777 captain bid, so I'm very excited about that. I've been mentoring for about 20 years. About 20 years ago, I volunteered for my airline's mentorship program, where they actually trained me in how to train people like you to successfully make it through the interview and the hiring process. I call it my peek behind the curtain because during that training, they called me back to Denver and they actually told me the questions that they were going to ask, the reason for the questions. They told me what made for a lousy answer and what made for a great answer. And they also let me sit in on interviews. So before the applicant would walk in the door for their interview, I would actually sit there and look over the shoulder of the interviewers as they review the applicant's application. And I would actually sit in on the interview. After the interview, when the applicant leaves, I would sit in and watch the discussions as they determine if they're going to recommend that applicant or not. And also, and this is really important, I got a chance to talk to the decision makers, like the head honchos, who are going to make the decision if they're going to offer a job or if they're going to send that dreaded rejection letter. And they told me how they went about making that decision. And also, they assigned me people to prepare for an interview. And during that time, they would actually give me feedback. So if I sent somebody for an interview, they would tell me, okay, this is what this person did well, and this is what needed improvement. So it was a great peek behind the curtain. It was very, very revealing. Unfortunately, United ended that program after September 11th. However, me and my fellow mentors, we continued taking that information that they gave us, and we've kept helping people ever since. In fact, we developed a system which is based on that information we got during training and also based upon 20 years of experience. We kind of took the information that we had and we made a system to really basically help save us time when we were preparing people. And then also we were able to give it to the people who we're mentoring and they can really use that and run with it. Also, I want to mention that that system is not just for United Airlines. We actually have a success rate in the high 95 percentile rate, not just for United, but with all the airlines. So during this webinar, we're going to talk to you about basically that system that we developed. So here we go. Secret number 1 is all about the passion. Now, one of the very important things to understand during the interview is that when they call you for an interview, you may have a certain amount of flight time. You may have thousands of hours of flight time. You may have flown a certain airplane, pilot in command time, and so forth. That's what got you the interview. But that's not what's going to get you hired. And just to kind of make a point of this, a lot of times if somebody will come to me and they say they have an interview with a particular airline, I'll say, okay, well, let me guess. Let me see if I can guess how much flight time you have. And I would basically guess pretty close how much flight time they have, where they've been flying, how much pilot in command time they have. And they would say, well, man, that's really, how did you know that? How did you know how much flight time I have? And I would say the reason I know that's because that's the same amount of flight time that everybody has. If you come from the civilian world, you guys all have basically the same amount of flight time. You fly basically the same airplane to basically the same places. And if you come from the military world, you have basically the same flight time, flying basically the same airplane to basically the same places, depending on which branch of the military that you're coming from. So with that being said, everybody's coming in there and on paper, everybody looks basically the same. So how do the interviewers go about determining who they want to hire for the next 25, 30, or 40 years with the airline? And what that comes down to is the person. What type of person are you? That's what they're trying to assess. And one of the biggest things they look for is how much passion do you have as a pilot and how much passion do you have as a person. And so what they look for is passion for your industry, how much passion you have for this industry. How much passion do you have for your own personal professionalism? How much passion do you have for the airline that you're applying to? These are all the things that they kind of try to assess. These are going to help you to stand out from all the other people who have basically the same flight experience as you have. It's all about the passion. And the reason this is so important is because over time they found that pilots who are passionate, they tend to do things like wear their uniform with pride. They tend to shine their shoes and have their uniform freshly pressed. People who are passionate tend to come to training more prepared, to do a good job. People who are passionate about their profession, about their own sense of professionalism, tend to follow the SOPs. Have you found that? Have you ever flown with somebody who's really passionate? Have you noticed that they tend to do things like follow the SOPs? People who are passionate tend to get along better with their fellow employees. They tend to look out for their passengers. They tend to treat people with kindness and respect. People who are passionate tend to hold up better during the down cycles of this industry. If you've been in this industry for any period of time, you know that this industry has its ups and downs. We call it feast or famine. When the economy is doing great and everybody's getting their captain upgrades and getting pay raises, everything is great and everybody's happy. But what happens during the downturn when people are getting bumped back from the right seat to the left seat, or they're taking some kind of a pay cut, or there's prolonged contract negotiations? People who are passionate tend to hold up better during that time. In fact, I can share a personal experience that I've had. I've been through the ups and downs of this industry, and I've been through times when, everybody's really upset because we're taking pay cuts or your aircraft's in bankruptcy. We've been through bankruptcy in my airline and so forth. And what I found is there's been times when I'm flying a trip with a first officer, and on paper, it may be a really easy trip. Maybe I'm flying, one leg out and one leg back. And I come back and I say, man, why am I so tired right now? I'm exhausted right now. Why am I so tired? And the reason why a lot of times is because the pilot I'm flying with basically wore me out because they're so upset with what's going on with the airline. They're so upset what's going on, they took a pay cut or something of that nature. And so by them being upset, they actually take that out on me and on my passengers and their fellow employees. On the other hand, I've had times when I've flown a very hard trip on paper. It may be a 4-day trip at multiple legs a day, and on paper it's a really hard trip. And I come home and I feel like, man, I'm pretty refreshed. I mean, I'm not even that tired. I've actually really enjoyed that trip. Why is that? And the reason is because the person I flew that trip with, they had such a great attitude that it made a tough trip much, much more enjoyable. And so I would say to you that observation that I've had, all the captains of United Airlines had that same observation, that same experience. And so what they're doing, a lot of times the reason why they're even, volunteering their time, taking time away from their family to even do interviews is because they say, you know what? I'm tired of flying with pilots who are upset. I want to find some pilots who really, really want to be here, who really, really love their job, somebody who I would really enjoy flying with, a 4-day trip with. And that's why they're there. And that's why passion is so important. And one of the very best questions that they can ask you that would allow them to tell how much passion you have is the very first question that most airlines will ask you on every interview. Every airline will ask this question, usually right out the gate. Tell me about yourself. And what they're really saying is, and what they're really trying to find is, tell me about your passion. And if you would notice, they have many different ways they can ask this question. They can say, straight up, tell me about yourself. Or they can say, walk me through your resume. Or some airlines will even give you a hint. Here's what they'll say. Tell me about yourself. How did you get to the point where you can interview with this airline today? And tell me about how did you get that spark to become an airline pilot? And when they say, how did you get that spark? That's the big clue there. They're giving you a big hint. That spark, that passion. That's one of the first questions to ask you. This is probably the most important question on the entire interview, because this is the question where you can show that interviewer your passion. So, we just talked about it's the most important question. Now, what happens is one of the big mistakes I see over and over and over again when I'm preparing people for the interview is I'll say, tell me about yourself. I'll give them the hint. How did you get that spark to become an airline pilot? How did you get that spark to fly? And what they would do is they would just start walking me through their resume, and they'll say, well, in 2005, I got my private. In 2006, I got my instrument, and they kind of just walk me through their numbers. Or they would give me a prepared speech, and it comes across, quite frankly, really boring. And it's the same numbers that everybody else has. So what you need to do and what you want to do is use one of the most important principles in marketing. If you ever have a marketing background or a background in sales, there's a saying that they say, and they say facts tell and stories sell. So what does that mean? Facts tell and stories sell. Well, what that really quite honestly means is that if you sit there and walk them through the numbers, just the raw numbers of when you got your private and your instrument, your multi, or how much flight time you have, you just tell them the facts. But when you're trying to sell something, whenever you want to sell something, you want to tell a story about what you're trying to sell. And the reason why is because people make decisions based on emotion, and then they justify their decisions with logic. Very, very important principle to understand. People make decisions based on emotion, and then they justify their decisions with logic. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, no, I'm different. I make my decisions based on logic. I just look at the pure numbers, and then I make my decision. And you may think that, and it may seem that way, but really, no. Think about the last time you may have bought a new car, for example. You know, you may have gone down to the car dealership and you sit in the car and you smell that nice new car smell. And then the salesperson will say, hey, do you want to take it for a test spin? And you go out and you drive around and it's really smooth and quiet. And, you know, you turn the music on. The music sounds really good, great speakers. And you say, yeah, I want to go ahead and buy this. Somewhere inside you say, I'm going to buy this. But now you got to justify it. Now you start saying, well, how much gas mileage does this Porsche get? You know, how much, yeah, the gas mileage may not be great, man, but it has a sunroof, you know, things like that. And so you're making decisions on an emotional level. And that's the same thing with your interviewers. They make their decisions on an emotional level. And so one of the best ways to reach somebody's emotion is through telling them a story. So if you do this correctly, and in their mind and in their heart, they will actually get up from their side of the table, come around, sit down next to you, and put their arms around you and say, man, I really like you. How can I help you get higher? Let me help you get higher. Let me recommend you. Let me put my name on the line for you. That's what they're doing in their mind and their heart on the emotional level. And that's the power of stories. And so over the years, we developed a technique which we call the hero of the movie technique. And this technique is based on basically 20 years of experience. And what we learned over time is how to tell a story in such a way where you're going to touch them on the emotional level and get them invested in your career and your success. Now, the challenge is You have about 5 to 7 minutes to do that. You don't have a lot of time. So what's really critically important is the format that you use. And so we developed the hero of the movie technique, and then just to kind of describe it a little bit, it's like basically within about 5 minutes or 7 minutes, you're going to basically take your interviewer on a through a mental movie. You're basically giving them a mental movie of your career, and they're picturing your career in their mind as you tell your story. And so it's like that's why we call it the movie, and you're the hero of the movie. And the secret and the power is in the format, the plot line. The power is in the plot line where you're going to tell them where you came from, and you're going to talk about things, give them a mental image of where you were raised and your family and your socioeconomic conditions. You'll talk about how you first got that spark. You'll describe in details where they can really see it. They can feel it. They can smell it, where you got that first spark to fly an airplane and where you first decided to become an airline pilot. And then we talk about how you came up with your plan and then the setbacks and the triumphs along the way. And we call a technique calling it coming full circle, where you are today after this long journey. And so the secret is in the format. A lot of times somebody would tell us their story, and then we would basically repeat their story back to them using the plot line that we kind of perfected over the years. And they're blown away by their own story. They said, well, I didn't realize that my story was that compelling. And it really is, if you know how to present it. Now, the power of the hero of the movie technique is this. A couple of things. Number one, if you have something that happened in your life that you're not particularly proud of, or something that we can call it a setback, you can use the hero of the movie technique to actually turn that setback or failure or shortcoming that you had. You can use this technique to take that very thing that you ordinarily wouldn't even want to talk about in an interview and turn that into one of your biggest strengths during the interview. That's what's so great about this technique. And then the next thing that's really great about this technique is that it actually, the interviewer, once they become involved in your movie, they get to write the ending. And by human nature, we all want a happy ending. Think about any movie you've gone to and you get invested into the hero, and you're watching this movie and you're rooting for the hero, and you want that hero to come out on top at the end of the movie. And it's the very same thing with the hero of the movie technique. If you do this correctly, by the time you're done, the interviewers are actually rooting for you. And that's an amazing thing to have on an interview. I remember, just to give you a couple of examples, there's one young man that I worked with. He came from a war-torn country in Africa. And he was telling me, and I said, tell me about yourself. And he gave me that generic, standard, rehearsed speech. I got my flight time. I got my, private pilot in 2000, whatever. And then I got my instrument, and then I got my multi, and then I got my, commercial, whatever, my CFI. And then I got my first, and he basically went through the same standard, facts to say that most people do on their interview. And when he was done, I said, dude, you come from a war-torn country in Africa. I know you have a story. Tell me the real story. And during that time, he was like, I can't tell you the story because it's too deep. It's, some parts of the story are too tragic. I can't tell you about my father was assassinated. I can't tell you how my mother disappeared for weeks and months on end. I can't tell you how I used to have to hide in the attic with my little sister and take care of her. And I was only about 12 years old, 10 or 12 years old at the time. I can't tell you how we had to escape that country at nighttime under bullets. I can't tell you how I came to America and I was actually homeless. When I finally made it to America, I was homeless for a good part of the time. I can't say all this on the interview. And this is what he's telling me. And I said, dude, that's exactly what you want to tell them. But you want to tell them in such a way where he was really concerned that it was too sad of a story. And I said, you know what? You could take that same story and turn it into a movie and turn it into a story of triumph. And, talk about how grateful you are to be here because you've been through all these things. And it actually took me a good 30 minutes to convince him to tell his story. And what's interesting is, the interesting thing about him is he has a very thick African accent. That actually concerned me a little bit. Like, man, how's his accent going to play on an interview? I was a little bit concerned about his accent. He had average flight time. I don't even, right now, I don't even remember what his flight time was. I know he worked for a regional airline, but that's basically all I really remember about him. But I definitely remember his story. And the next day after he took his interview, I said to him, I always debrief with the guys either that day or the next day. And I said, how did your interview go? And he said, you know what? They didn't even interview me. I said, well, what do you mean they didn't interview you? And he said, I spent the entire time on tell me about yourself. We never got beyond that one question. I think they spent almost the entire interview on that one question. Then they gave him one really softball, tell me about a time question. They gave him literally only one question that says, tell me about a time. They spent virtually the entire interview on that one question, tell me about yourself. And he got hired. So in other words, this guy basically got hired based on that one question. That's amazing. That let me know how powerful this technique called hero of the movie technique is. I had another young man who, again, he had average flight time. I say average, he had the same amount of time that everybody else has when they get their interview. And he had a very interesting story. I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically, he wanted to fly in the military and he couldn't because he didn't pass his physical. He couldn't pass his eye exam, and he left flying altogether. And one day, by a fluke, he ended up taking a flying lesson, just like a discovery flight, and he fell in love with flying all over again. And he convinced his wife, you know what? Let me take, if I can't fly for a living, let me just take flying lessons. And he took flying lessons, and he had to get his third class medical in order to get his private pilot. And he found out that the problem that prevented him from being a military pilot, that problem actually went away. It corrected itself. So now he has the possibility of actually flying for a living. Now, at the time, he was making good money in corporate America. So now he has to go home and convince his wife. He said, man, I drove around for hours trying to figure out how am I going to convince my wife that I'm going to give up a six-figure job, and we have a newborn on the way. How am I going to give up my six-figure job to basically start all over again, end up getting a job at a regional at some point, making $19,000 or $20,000 a year? And he finally did convince her, and he took his life savings. He went down to the flight school, and he was taking lessons. And one day he showed up, and the school was not there. They basically, I don't know, declared bankruptcy and just left with his life savings. And now he's at the point now where, what do I do? And he said, I'm not gonna give up. And I told him, when he was telling me his story, I said, you know what? I predict that right about this time, when you talk about how you showed up at that school and your life savings was gone along with the whoever owned that school, I predict that they're gonna put their pen down, they're gonna stop writing, and they're just gonna listen to you. And I said, when they put that pen down, you got them. And the next day I talked to him, and he was telling me about his interview, and I said, how did it go? And he said, you know what? Just like you said, right when I got to that point about them stealing my life savings, they put their pen down, they stopped writing, and they were just listening. And he said he laughed, and he kind of smiled on the inside and said, you know what? I got him. And that's how powerful this technique is. Don't let this question go to waste. This is the most important question. Tell me about yourself. And the hero of the movie technique will show you how to ace that one question. Now, you may be saying to yourself, yeah, Joel, that's great, but I don't come from a war-torn country. Or, you know what? Nobody stole my life savings. So I really don't have a story like that. And let me tell you, yes, you do. I can guarantee you that if you got to the point where you can build all your ratings, if you're from the civilian world, you got all your ratings, you got your you educated, you got your education, you've been flying for thousands of hours. I guarantee you, you have a story. A lot of times we take for granted what we had to go through to get here. Same with the military. If you served your country, you joined the military, you served your country, and you got through all the training, and you've actually been out there flying, serving your country. I guarantee you, you have a story, and don't take that for granted. But the power is in the format, how to tell that story in 5 to 7 minutes, and the hero of the movie technique will maximize that for you. All right, here we go. Secret number 2 is all about the points. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the people make their decisions based on emotion. If you did your job correctly during the first question, by the time they get to the tell me about your time and what would you do questions, now they already want to hire you. You have them. You had them from hello, like that expression. They want to hire you. So now you have to give them the logical reasons for them to put their name on the line and to recommend you. Does that make sense? They want to hire you. You just have to give them the ammunition now to put their name on the line. And so the next part of the interview, normally after they say, tell me about yourself, they usually, depending on the airline, they'll either ask you a question, tell me about a time, or what would you do? What would you do if this happened? How would you handle that? And so this is where you want to give them the logical ammunition to recommend you. And so to kind of talk about how you can do that, let me tell you a little bit about what I learned during that peek behind the curtain when they were training me to become a mentor. One of the things they told me, one of the first things they told me is, they said, Captain Gudger. So they said, we're interviewing them for first officer flight engineer. However, we are evaluating them as a captain. Now, if we come to the conclusion that they will make a really good first officer or a really fine flight engineer, but they will not make a great captain, we will not hire them. For us to hire them, they have to make an outstanding captain. You have to make a great first officer or flight engineer, but we were looking for outstanding captains. Does that make sense? And so wouldn't it be nice to know what they consider to be an outstanding captain? Wouldn't that be very helpful? And let's talk about that for a minute. During my first year of training at United Airlines, United is actually one of the first airlines that came up with CRM training. We had a different name for it back then, but it was CRM. And we learned that we had a seminar. I think they tried to give us a seminar within the first 3 months of being hired. It was during the new hire process. And during that seminar, I think it was like a 3-day seminar, if I recall. And during that seminar, they profiled different kinds of captains. There was kind of picture in your mind a graph. And on the graph, we have the vertical line. And from the bottom of the line all the way up to the top is measuring a captain's concern for people. And the graph starts from one at the bottom all the way up to 9 at the top. Okay, bear with me here. And then picture a horizontal line on this graph starting from 1 going all the way out to 9. And on that part of the graph, they're measuring a captain's concern for performance. Okay, now if they have what they call a 1-9 captain, that type of captain is a captain when it comes for concern for performance, they were a 1. But when it comes for the concern for people, they were a 9. In other words, they had a really high degree of concern for people. They love people, very, very much a people person. But when it came to performance, like SOPs, following the SOPs, doing a good brief, just being professional, not talking during sterile cockpit, things like that. When it came to performance, they had a very low regard. And so if you ever flown with this kind of captain, they will be the kind of captain that you really like this person. They have a great personality. You enjoy them. Love them on a layover. Maybe you guys go out for dinner or for beers and really good, fun person. But when you're in the cockpit, you might be uncomfortable. Like, man, he's talking when he should be briefing. He's skipping SOP, not really following the SOPs, and you might really feel uncomfortable flying with this person for that reason. Have you ever flown with somebody like that before? I think we all have at one point or another. On the other end of the spectrum, they have what they call the 9-1 captain. Now, this captain is the opposite. When it comes to performance, they are a 9. When it comes to people, they are a 1. This is the kind of captain is almost like the gear up, shut up. Put the gear up. You're there to bring the gear up. If I want your opinion, I'll ask for it or I'll give you your opinion. I don't, they're the kind of person that's very strong-willed, very hard to communicate with, very hard to reach. Have you ever flown with somebody like that before? I think we all have, right? And so those are the two opposite ends of the spectrum. The ultimate captain is what they call the 9-9 captain. This is the captain who has a really high degree of concern for people, and they have a really high degree of concern for performance. So this is the kind of captain that when you fly with this captain, you really enjoy them, you enjoy their company, they set a nice, relaxed tone in the cockpit, but at the same time, they don't cut corners, they follow the SOPs, and they're very professional. This, from a CRM perspective, is what we call the ultimate captain, the captain that we all strive to be. And I'm going to add another element in there, another 9, and that 9 would be concerned for the passengers. So they have a highest degree of concern for people, they are the fellow crew members, and they have the highest degree of concern for performance, and they have the highest degree of concern for their passengers. This, from a CRM perspective, is the ultimate captain. This is the captain that they're training us to become. And this is the captain that we are all striving to be. So, you may be asking yourself, okay, that's all well and good, but why are we talking about CRM during the interview? And the reason is because CRM is the language of the interviewers. That's the language that they speak. That's what they're looking for, that ultimate CRM captain. And understand that you're going to be interviewed by a captain or perhaps a first officer or more than one captain. There's usually a captain on your interview board, and that's the language of their captain. And here's what you want to understand. The more you speak their language, the more they're going to like you. Does that make sense? The more you speak their language, the more they're going to like you. All right. So let me explain. This is a really, really powerful concept that we've had a lot of success with, and we call it the game show concept. And the way this works is I want you to picture yourself as a contestant on a game show. And so you're the contestant, and the interviewers are the hosts, right? And they ask you a question. Tell me about a time, or what would you do? One of those types of questions. And I want you to picture a big giant scoreboard above you that's showing your score, okay? And you give your answer. Now, here's the thing. The more you talk in the terms of the tools and techniques of CRM, the more your score is going to go up. So you're giving your answer, you're giving the tools and techniques of CRM, your score is going up, up, and up. The moment you stop giving the tools and techniques of CRM, your score stops going up. If they ask you a question, tell me about a time or what would you do, and you don't use the tools and techniques of CRM, your score not only does it not go up, but it may actually go down. So that's a huge, a very, very powerful technique. The game show concept is you want to speak in your answers in terms of the tools and techniques of CRM. So let me give you a little bit more detail. During the CRM seminar that we had years ago, they talked about the 4 fundamentals of CRM. One of them was conflict resolution. This is when you're trying to resolve a disagreement or some kind of confrontation or conflict in the cockpit. Okay, the next one is inquiry. And this is when the captain is trying to gather information, or the other crew members are trying to gather information to help them make a good decision. The next one is advocacy. This is where you're trying to advocate your position. You're trying to advocate taking a course of action, or you're trying to advocate not taking a particular course of action. And critique is when you make a plan, you're following your plan, and then you're trying to determine, okay, is our plan going the way that it should go? Or are there other factors that came into play that should make us reconsider our plan? Another way to use critique also is if you have to give some kind of constructive input to your crew members. You have to maybe tell them something they didn't know that's going to help them improve their performance. Okay, so those are the 4 fundamentals. Let me tell you a little bit about where they came from very briefly. Years ago, United Airlines had a flight from Denver to Portland, and they had what we would call a 9-1 captain on board, very strong personality captain. He had 2 crew members, a co-pilot and a flight engineer who were a little bit intimidated by this captain. And they were flying into Portland, and when they were on the approach, and they brought the gear down, and they only got 2 green lights. And so they broke off the approach, left the area, and they went to go work on their problem of only having 2 green lights. And as they are there circling around working on the problem, at some point the engineer expressed concern about the fuel. The engineer was concerned about the fuel. And then at some point, I think the first officer expressed some concern about the fuel as well. However, the captain did not get it. They communicated the message, but it didn't reach the captain. And so they're out there circling around, and they got a low fuel warning light, and they said, oh man, we got to go back to the airport. And they tried to get back to the airport, and they actually landed off field. When they did their investigating, they realized that somebody in the cockpit had the answer. And they realized that, hey, had they had conflict resolution skills, if they were able to resolve the conflict of the engineer and the co-pilot wanting to go back because they were low on fuel, that could have saved the day. If the captain had inquiry skills where he was inquiring as to the thoughts and concerns of his crew members, that could have saved the day. If the flight engineer and co-pilot had stronger advocacy skills where they could have advocated their position, that could have saved the day. Or if they had critique skills, if they were able to evaluate their plan, that could have saved the day. So all these 4 fundamentals could have saved the day. Now, what's interesting is, I want you to notice that if you ever look at the sample questions of any interview, what you're going to find is pretty much any question they ask you that starts with, tell me about a time, or what would you do? Those questions are all asking you about those 4 fundamentals of CRM. They're either asking you about your conflict resolution skills, your inquiry skills, your advocacy skills, or your critique skills. That's what they're asking about. For example, if they said, tell me about a time you had a disagreement in the cockpit, they're asking you about your conflict resolution skills. All right? Does that make sense? And so what you want to do is, in your mind, you want to say, okay, they're asking me about my conflict resolution skills. What kind of, here's how the process goes. They ask you a question, tell me about a time you had a disagreement in the cockpit. What you're thinking is, oh, that's conflict resolution. So you would have identified which one of the 4 fundamentals that they're talking about. And then from there, you say, okay, they want to know about my techniques for conflict resolution. And so when you tell your story, you're going to talk about how you did such things as diffusing the situation. How did you diffuse it? Maybe you diffuse it using a technique of saying, hey, you know what, you could be right, I'm probably wrong. Tell you what, let's look up in the book. Or, hey, I apologize. Sometimes it's a simple act of apologizing. However, here's what I was thinking. Or sometimes, if you have a confrontation, let some time go by and reflecting on it. And what's really important on the interview is using the other fundamentals, communicating, using inquiry and advocacy, and ultimately resolving the situation. So that's when they ask you, they have many different ways they can ask that question. Tell me about a time you had a disagreement. Tell me about a time you had a confrontation. Tell me about a time you were upset. Tell me about a time somebody was upset with you. Tell me about a time somebody undermined your authority. Those are all conflict resolution questions. And no matter what question they ask, all you need to know is what they're looking for. You go, okay, they're looking for my conflict resolution techniques. And the great thing about this, is you don't have to really know what question they're going to ask you. I mean, even every interview, what I've noticed, no matter how much we try to prepare, there's always going to be some questions that we did not anticipate. So here's the thing. When you go for an interview, they know that the moment you walk out of that interview, you're going to write the questions down and you're going to tell your network, all the people who you're networking with, the questions that they ask you. The airlines know that. So then the next person is going to come in prepared for that question already. And the airlines don't really want canned answers. So it's kind of a cat and mouse game going on. What the airlines will do, they have two different techniques to deal with this. One technique is to just change all the questions from time to time. And I've had that happen to a couple of people who came through. We prepared for the questions we knew about, and they did not get one single question that they were prepared for. But in that case, they said, you know what, there's no problem, because they knew how to evaluate what they're looking for. Because no matter how they phrase the question, they still got to find out the same thing. They still have to find out about your conflict resolution skills and the other fundamentals. So they can phrase it differently, but it's going to ultimately be the same thing they're looking for. Does that make sense? And so they do that by changing the questions, or they'll use another technique is they'll use follow-ups. They'll ask you a question and they know basically what you're going to say because everybody gives the same answer. And then they start coming with a bunch of follow-up questions. And that's and you cannot anticipate the follow-up questions because those questions are based on what you say. So they don't know what they're going to ask you and you don't even know. So there's no way you can really anticipate all the follow-up questions. And then another technique they use is they have a bank of questions that's so huge that you just can't prepare for every single question that they may possibly ask you. And so that's how they overcome this problem of, pilots coming in with canned answers. So that's why it's critical to know which of the four fundamentals are, have those memorized, and have the tools and techniques of the four fundamentals. And you can answer the questions whether you prepare for them or not. For example, if they say, tell me about a time you gave input on a plan of action, you're going to think to yourself, okay, I gave input. What is it? Which one of the four fundamentals? Oh, you know what? That sounds a lot like advocacy. Oh, what they're really asking me is, tell me about a time I advocated my position. And so what they really want to know are the tools and techniques of advocacy. For example, United Airlines have what they call cuss words. C standing for concern. Captain, I'm concerned about this. Or the next higher level, Captain, I'm uncomfortable with this. And the next higher level after that, Captain, this is not safe. We call those the cuss words. And that's a great tool for first officers to communicate very efficiently and effectively what they're thinking. They're concerned, or they're uncomfortable, or they're unsafe. This is not safe, what we're doing. And the captains are actually trained, if they hear those words, to kind of slow down and say, okay, let's resolve why you're concerned or uncomfortable. Okay. So a great technique is to use one of the cuss words, Captain, I'm uncomfortable about this, and then give good information followed by a recommendation. For example, hey, Captain, I noticed that the aircraft ahead of us reported moderate turbulence at our altitude. I recommend that we seat the flight attendants and request flight level 350. And so you gave them good information. There's moderate turbulence ahead. Here's my recommendation. So when you add these things together, hey, Captain, I'm concerned about the weather ahead, or I'm concerned about the weather on our route. Looks like there's thunderstorms building over the area. I recommend that we add fuel. So these are advocacy techniques. And so if you're showing these techniques on the interview, if they say, well, tell me about time you didn't like a particular course of action, you can tell them about, there was weather building on the route and you didn't feel you had enough fuel. Here's how I handled it. I showed my concern and I gave good information. I made this recommendation. When you do that, the person who's interviewing is going, oh, wow, that's great. That's great CRM. And you're going to get more points. Does that make sense, guys? Great, very, very effective technique. Now, you may have heard of the STAR technique, where they say you talk about the situation, and this is just a way of organizing your answers or your stories, the situation, the task, what were the actions you took, and the results. What were the results? And the reason I bring this up is because a very, very common mistake that I see people make when I'm preparing them for the interview is they'll spend 90% of their time on the situation and the task. And they spend very little time on the action. And they might spend a little bit of time on the results. And with the game show concept in mind, understand that when you're talking about the action, that's where most of the points, that's where most of the points are. So you want to spend most of your time on the actions. You want to give enough information to here's the situation. Okay, I was a pilot monitoring, I was a pilot flying. You want to set it up so they know what the situation is, but where the points are is when you talk about the action. I mean, the reason why is because that's where you're talking about the tools and techniques of CRM. Does that make sense? So if you're using the game show concept, the beauty of this game show concept is you can answer any question and the follow-up questions that they may ask you. And again, I mentioned earlier, I've had multiple times when, we did everything we could to prepare. And I'll say, well, how did your interview go? Did they ask you the question that we talked about? And they said, well, no. They asked one of the questions, but there's always 2 or 3 questions or, that we never could anticipate. And one, like I say, one time they asked the entire interview, all the questions were different. They just happened to interview when the airlines are switching over all their questions. And when that happened, the person I prepped said, you know what, no problem, because I just thought, oh, that's a conflict resolution question. Oh, okay, let me answer it. Oh, that's nothing more than an inquiry question. Let me answer it. I had another young man who was, interviewing an American. They just asked him a bunch of follow-up questions. He just said, oh, okay, I know exactly what they're looking for. So that's the great part or the great benefit of the game show concept. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now, let's go to secret number 3. It's all about the preparation. And let me tell you a story of a friend of mine, a very, very close friend of mine when I was coming up. His name is Ross, and really his name is not Ross. I'm changing his name to protect the innocent. But let's say his name was Ross. He actually started flying a little bit before me. He was rolling along, getting his ratings, and he kind of really influenced me to get my ratings. I think I can safely say that if it wasn't for Ross, I may not be a pilot today, because he really encouraged me and he really showed me, hey, you can actually do this. So Ross was further along in his career because he started flying before I did. So he was kind of like a mentor to me. And Ross was a great pilot, very conscientious pilot. And he went through the process, finally got his flight time, and he got an interview with his dream airline. And I was really, really happy for Ross. I said, man, this is his big break. And I said, you know what? Ross is a great pilot. I know they're going to hire him. They're going to see he's a great pilot. I know they're going to hire him. Now, when Ross was preparing for his interview, there were several different people you can kind of go to at the time to do mock interviews. There's about 2 or 3 main players out there, and there was about 2 or 3 main players as far as doing sim preparation and so forth. And so Ross, he went to one of each. And I remember saying to Ross, why don't you go to the other ones? He was like, well, you know what, I used this particular interview prep service. I used this one sim session. I think that's enough. And I really can't afford to spend the extra $200 or whatever it is to go to the other person. And so Ross didn't do that. He kind of cut corners a little bit, in my opinion. But, I say he's a great pilot, so it shouldn't be a problem. Well, long story short, Ross did really well on the sim check, as expected. But when it came to the interview, he bombed his interview. They asked him questions he just wasn't prepared for. And he bombed his interview, and he knew it. And he was really crushed and heartbroken over his interview. And so Ross ended up getting that rejection letter. Now, Ross was very lucky because he did end up getting another interview a few years later. And I got to tell you, that's kind of not the norm today. In today's world, if you don't make it the first time, you very well may not get another shot at your interview. The thinking on it that the interviewers, the airlines have, is that, you know what, we gave so-and-so their shot. They didn't make it through the interview. If I give them another chance, they're taking away from somebody who never got their first chance. So it's becoming increasingly difficult to get another interview if you don't make it through your first interview. So I really want you to understand that. There's a couple of airlines out there that we've had a hard time seeing anybody get a second shot if they didn't make it the first time out. Some airlines, you can, but even then, it's a uphill battle. But in Ross's case, he was very lucky. He got a second interview. However, he lost about 2,000 seniority numbers. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. 2,000 seniority numbers. What's the cost of that? And if you think about that, he lost his captain upgrade. He was in the right seat when he could have been a captain. He was probably flying a much smaller airplane, a narrow body, when he could have been flying a wide body. He's paying the price every single month when he bid his schedule because he's junior when he should be senior. So all told, he lost probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. Think about that for a moment. He didn't want to pay $200 for an extra prep. And he has to think for the rest of his career, what if I just would have paid that measly $200? That could have made a difference of literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, not to mention job security. And there's a saying in this business, you can either have job security or you can be somebody else's job security. So what's the moral of the story? Don't play Russian roulette with your career. Does that make sense? You do not want to play Russian roulette with your career. So let me ask you a question. Are you playing Russian roulette with your career? And let me tell you how you can tell. What I see all the time is that you're building your flight time. Let's say you're working for the regional airlines, you're a very, very senior co-pilot, or you're a captain and you're building up your PIC time, or let's say you're in the military, you're really focusing on your military flying, and that's great. But you're not really preparing for your interview. And what you need to understand is interviewing is a skill. And so you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm applying for the airlines. I'm applying, trying to get that interview. And once I get the interview, then and only then am I going to go out and start actually preparing for my interview, right? I see this all the time. So the airline will call them up and say, congratulations, you got your interview. And now the person is super excited. Okay, great, I got the interview. So now you got to call up and you got to schedule your interview. And they may give you a choice. They may say, okay, we have a date available. How does, end of the week Friday? How does that sound to you? Okay, can't do that one. All right, what about next Wednesday? A little bit too soon. You got, all right, how about 2 weeks from Thursday? And that's typically how it happens. You usually have about 2, maybe 3 weeks, okay? But really you don't have that much time because you might have to fly a trip in that time. So now you have maybe somewhere, if you're lucky, 2 weeks or maybe a little bit more. And now you start saying, okay, well, let me prepare. Okay, who can I call? I can call Emerald Coast, or I can call Judy Tarver. You call all the people are out there, and they're great people. But understand, you're trying to develop a skill, and it's like a cram. It's like a race against the clock. Can I develop enough skills to pass this interview before I run out of time and have to actually go in? And unfortunately, I've seen people who otherwise would have been prepared. They otherwise could have gotten hired. They simply ran out of time. Okay? So if your plan is to wait until you get the interview invite to start preparing, then you are actually playing Russian roulette with your career. And I want to suggest to you that's a very, very dangerous game to play because there's a very limited number of airlines out there. You only get a certain amount of shots. There's 3 legacy carriers, there's some regionals and some cargo, and you don't get that many shots. So the biggest thing I could tell you is don't play Russian roulette with your career. Does that make sense? Okay, so the way that you do that, the way that you avoid playing Russian roulette with your career is you want to start preparing before you get the interview invite. Okay, don't wait till you get the interview invite to start preparing. Start preparing before. That is one of the biggest secrets I can tell you if you're out there, and one of the best ways to prepare is to go out there, fly the line, and start using these 4 fundamentals of CRM that we talked about. Using them in your everyday flying. Using them and see how that works out for you. And then kind of keeping a journal of your experiences. When you do that, you're building up what we call the content. And if you have great content, then when you get that interview, you're going to be a strong, strong candidate. Okay? So don't wait till you get your interview invite. Start preparing way before you get your interview. Now, if you happen to be someone who hears this recording and you say, well, thanks a lot, Joe. I wish I would have known that 2 months ago because I actually do have an interview scheduled. If that's the case, my suggestion to you is don't make the mistake that Ross made when he said, you know what, I went to one person, but I don't need to go to the other. You know, you're trying to save money. This is not the time to save money. This is the time to do all that you can to give yourself the best possibility for success. And with that in mind, I recommend that you take an all of the above approach. I've had people back, there's a time when United Airlines, you know, you have to do a sim evaluation. And there was a company that cost about $1,500, if I recall, to do a session for their sim. And I've had people say, well, Captain Gudger, do you recommend that I do one session or two? And I say, you know what? And that's a lot of money. That's the difference between $1,500 and $3,000, right? That's a lot of money. But I tell them, I say, you know what? I would rather for you to come out that interview and say, you know what? I aced my sim evaluation. I did really, really well. I feel really good about it. And in retrospect, I really didn't need to take that second sim session. But you know what? I'm glad I did. I'd rather for you to say that than to say, you know what? Oh, I didn't do very well. I'm really nervous about my sim ride. Man, I wish I'd have took one more session. I'd rather if you just be over-prepared and not need it, in other words, than to be thinking, what if? There are several good companies out there. There's Emerald Coast. There's Judy Tarver, Cheryl Cage, and others. There are some very good people out there. Don't cut corners. Okay, this is a time to do everything that you possibly can to be prepared when you walk in that interview. Now, I want you to understand that when you go to one of these interview prep companies, they have a very limited amount of time to work with you. They really don't have enough time to teach you how to interview. They can give you some tips. They can polish up some things, but they can't teach you. They just simply do not have enough time. They can give you feedback. So what you need to do is learn the skill of interviewing before you even go to the prep services. Does that make sense? So let me ask you a question. Would you like some help? Would you like to have the same tool that we've been using so successfully for the past 20 years? And if the answer is yes, I want you to keep listening. But if you feel like, you know what, Joe, I don't really need any help. I'm doing fine on my own. Okay, I understand that, and I want to wish you luck. But if you would like to do everything that you can to be prepared for that, what may be your once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I want you to keep listening. And I want to present to you what I call the total package. They can really help you to develop your interview skills. So that, and that's the plan, you want to develop your interview skills before you actually have to go to the Judy Tarvers of the world, and they can give you feedback. Does that make sense? All right, so here's what I want to offer you. The first thing I want to offer you is the Hero of the Movie video, and that's $149 value. And I want you to keep listening because I'm going to give you a great discount at the end of this package. But the Hero of the Movie video is a video that shares with you step by step how to put together that story to get the absolute most out of your flying career, where you can put your flying career into a 5 to 7 minute video that's really going to touch your interviewers on an emotional level to really get them invested in your career. All right, that's $149 value. Next, we have the Hero of the Movie Practical Guide. So this is a written guide that's going to show you how to step by step put together your Hero of the Movie story. That's a $49 value. Next, we have the hero of the movie PowerPoint presentation. And this is just a PowerPoint of the overall video that you can kind of go through at your own leisure, and in case you want to go back and review some things without having to look at the entire video. And that's a $19 value. Next, we got the hot items video. This is the video where you're really going to get that same peek behind the curtain that I received. In this video, we kind of boiled down everything that I learned when I went to training and how to teach people to become successful in the interview process. And this video is basically packed with information that we learned over 20 years of helping people to interview. We call it hot items because this is the things that we found out that is very, very important when you're out there interviewing with the airlines. You're going to also learn the game show concept. You're going to go in much, much more detail on how to use that game show concept. You're going to learn how to answer the other critically important question, which is a passion question, is why do you want to work for our airline? Again, that's another question that's conveying passion. You're going to learn how to handle what we call special items. These are things that maybe like things like check ride failures, DUIs, aircraft accidents, FAA violations, job terminations, bad grades, traffic tickets. We've had them all. Felonies and misdemeanors. Believe me when I tell you, we've handled just about every single kind of special item that you can think of. And we've actually helped people to get hired. And we'll show you the techniques we use on how to handle special items. I had a young man, it's been a few years now ago, but he applied to pretty much every airline out there, and he was turned down. And his spirits were really broken. And he actually got an interview with United, but he wasn't really confident. It's like, man, I've been turned down by everybody. And we talked about his background a little bit. And as it turned out, he had a DUI about, I think it was like 10 years earlier. And he felt like that DUI was really literally killing his career. And he's a very nice guy, very responsible guy. He just had a bad day. He just, his airline that he worked for went out of business without notice. He got together with his fellow pilots who found themselves suddenly unemployed. And they got together for some drinks because they knew that they may not see each other again for a long time. And he was driving home afterwards. He was pulled over and he was over the limit. That was like 10 years ago. And I remember I said to him, I said, well, tell me what happened. And he just, when he got to that point, he would kind of break down, you know, and he couldn't talk about it. And then so we worked on a technique where I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. When they ask you about it, I want you to say, you know what? I'm really glad you brought that up. I was hoping to have the opportunity to address that. Here's what happened. And we literally practiced that statement for like 3 or 4 days. I said, I don't even want you to tell me what happened. Just say that. You know what? I'm very happy you brought that up. I was hoping to have an opportunity to talk about that. Here's what happened. And we worked on that one statement for like 3 or 4 days to the point where he really felt comfortable saying that. And we worked on the body language. Made sure that his body language was congruent to what he was saying. And finally, once he got comfortable saying that, I said, okay, now tell me what happened. And he was able to tell me what happened. And he actually turned that into one of his strongest parts of his interview. And he works for United today. He's been with United for a few years now. So you're going to learn how to work on what we call special items. All right. And much, much more. We're going to talk about the decision-making process, we're going to talk about how to present that question. Tell me about your worst emergency. We're going to show you how to get the absolute most out of telling that story in a very organized way where you can get the most points using the 4 fundamentals of CRM, using the decision-making process and steps for handling an emergency. We're going to talk about all those things and how to make that one of your strongest answers. So all that's covered in the hot items video and much, much more. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a $149 value. Next, we have the hot items interview prep guide. It's a very convenient guide that basically guide you step by step on how to put together your answers and how to prepare for all the different kinds of questions that they can ask you. And this guide would just help you really get the most out of your preparation time and really put together those strong answers because again, time is of the essence. A lot of times when you get that interview, you only have a couple of weeks. So we're going to show you how to make the most out of those 2 weeks that you have before your interview. That's assuming that you didn't get the opportunity to start preparing long before you got the interview invite. So that's a $49 value. And we have the hot items PowerPoint presentation. Again, that's just for your convenience in case you want to go back at your leisure and review all the items that was on the video. And that's a $19 value. Plus, we have a special bonus. This is called the Unfair Advantage at the Job Fair. And this bonus is really good if you don't have your interview yet. The airlines are starting to move away from job fairs, but they're starting at the different conventions, and they're starting to move more towards their own in-house job fairs. And even though they're not officially at some of these conventions, they're still there and they're still talking to people. You may meet them, you might meet them in a line somewhere, or you might meet them downstairs at a restaurant. You never know where you're going to meet somebody. You may meet somebody in your jump seat. And you'll be amazed of what you can have accomplished if you have the right person in your jump seat. I've seen that over and over again. So what you need to know is you want to know how to touch them in such a way where they want to offer you the interview. We want to show you how to boil that down to about 5 minutes. You got about 5 minutes or 7 minutes to really kind of make them want to recommend you for the interview. Now, this special bonus video was put together using information from actual airline recruiters. We talked about what recruiters are looking for when they want to recommend somebody for the interview. And that's a $97 value. So the total value of this entire package is $531. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to charge you $531, but I'm going to give you a significant discount. But let me ask you a question. If all this program did is to show you how to ace that first question where they ask you, tell me about yourself, and you got them on your side where they're ready to hire you right then and there. If all this program did is teach you how to do that, would it be worth it? I think so. I think it would definitely be worth it to get the interviewers on your side. Or if all this program did was to show you how to answer all the surprise questions and follow-up questions and special issues, if it shows you how to handle that in such a way where you can turn those things into your biggest strength, would it be worth it? I think so. I absolutely be worth $531 because this is a multi-million-dollar career. This may be your one and only shot. Okay, so you really want to make the most of that shot. Okay, if all this program does is to make you comfortable and confident when you walk in there and sit down, knowing that you have that peek behind the curtain, would it be worth $531? Absolutely. But as I mentioned, I'm not going to charge $531. If you buy this course today, you can get this entire package for just $166. Think about it. That's less than the price of a flying lesson. If you would go out and take a flying lesson, it'll probably cost you more than that. And that's to get you prepared for your opportunity. $166. Go to www.theunfairadvantagesystem.com/order. If you order today, $166. Plus, PayPal has a program that they call their easy payment option. And if you qualify for this program, then they will allow you to take up to 6 months to pay for it without paying any interest whatsoever if you pay it off within 6 months. And so what you can do is you can break the payment up into 6 easy installments of $27.66. So you can pay just $27.66 today, and you can have this entire package. For less than the price of a cup of coffee per day, you can make this huge impact on your career. Can you afford $27 today for your career? Is your multi-million-dollar shot, is that worth it? I think so. Also, if you order today, we can show you how you can get this entire program essentially for free. And that is you will be eligible to participate in our referral program. Now, here's how this works. If you get the course today and you tell somebody about the course, you will receive a $50 cash reward for every person who you refer to purchase the course. So I know many times you have your network of people who you're working with. If you tell somebody in your network to buy the course, you will get a $50 reward as well. And they have the same opportunity. So if they go out and recommend somebody, they have the same opportunity as you. And so if you just refer just 4 people, you've more than covered your costs. So in fact, once you cover your costs, you can keep doing this. You can tell people about it. If you want to make a little bit extra cash to go out for a nice dinner, or you want to buy a barbecue grill or something. Let's say you want to buy something, you can use the money through this program to give you some extra cash. And it's up to you. Or you can make this into a source of income. There's no limit to this. And this is available to you today if you order now. So just to recap, we have the Hero of the Movie Technique, $149 value. The Hero of the Movie Practice Guide, a $49 value. We have the Hero of the Movie PowerPoint Presentation, a $19 value. We have the Hero of the Movie Hot Items Video, that peek behind the curtain, $149 value. We have the Hot Items Prep Guide, $49 value. And we have the Hot Items PowerPoint Presentation, a $19 value. And we have that special bonus of the Unfair Advantage Job Fair, total value, $531. And again, if you order today, you're eligible to participate in our referral program. So there's really no excuse. There's really no excuse because you can pay just $166, $27 today, and you have a source of income in the future. So with that being said, go to www.theunfairadvantagesystem.com/order. And I hope to see you there.